So if you kind of carry that pace on in the next 10 to 15 years, we'll be close to that like critical stage where we're more transitioning into a franchise model. So it is starting to pick up pace. We see it from an independent management company perspective. Our interactions with the brands, etc., it's certainly picking up pace. But if you look at the stats, I think it also suggests that Africa, we are about 10 to 15 years behind, but it's transitioning very, very quickly.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, the hospitality in Africa is through a transition, and I think traditionally the owners viewed the brand as the operator, and then that is of course slowly changing as the owners became more educated, more informed, and I think that's how the franchise model is growing now, because it gives in that flexibility. And of course with the third-party operator, it also differentiates between the brand, the operator, and also the ownership roles. So the roles get more defined, and as I think the market grows and people understand this, I think franchise is the way, because it's also easier for the brands. They have a stronger pipeline as compared to when they are on franchise, on management only.
From our experience, we've noticed that there's been a rise in this independent hotel management company model along with a franchisor, primarily because there's been an increase in institutional capital. So these institutional investors would like to create a clear differentiation between who drives performance and who drives distribution, so that there's clear responsibility and accountability that can be maintained. We've also noticed that this is prevalent for multi-brand portfolios, owners with multi-brand portfolios. I mean, just to give you some perspective, we manage a massive complex in Dubai called the Jewel of the Creek, wherein there are 2 hotels encompassing close to 770 rooms, branded by Marriott and Hilton. So these are 2 competing brands operating within the same complex and managed by one single team, which is ALEPH. So basically, us as the independent operator acts as a glue to bring in all the components together. Yeah, so that's what we've noticed.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to that. Obviously we know owners are especially in Africa, are still single family assets, very entrepreneurial driven, and it's been an educational process, not just from the brand's point of view, but also from the operators, and that takes time. Educating owners to say that franchise isn't necessarily a weaker model than management. It's just allocating those, how can I say, responsibilities, those roles of the owner owns the investment, the operator operates, the brand supports, and just getting that message across over the years, and I think that's obviously gaining traction.
Yeah, I was going to touch on that institutional investor because, largely in Africa, mostly single asset, a lot of new owners. I mean, we've been working in the market for like 23 years, and still we're not seeing much, kind of starting to see a little bit more institutional investment coming in, pension funds slowly, but they also need the education, but not a lot of multi-asset investment companies that are happy to invest in hotels and then just drive it from a profit perspective. So are you seeing that changing in the market, and are we expecting that to increase significantly?
I mean, you must have heard that we took over a massive portfolio of 18 hotels last year, which are branded as Onimo. And yeah, definitely we are seeing a lot of traction in this space. And again, there's a lot of value to be added as an independent operator because, for example, for this particular portfolio, we've come up with a shared services center wherein most of the key functions, namely finance, revenue management, sales to a great extent, procurement, human resources, are all centralized. And it definitely adds value, and this is what these investors are looking for.
But in terms of those, do you charge for those, or is that just included in your fees? So are you saying that you do a lot of other value adds that the brands don't do? Maybe we can unpack those a bit more. So I mean, developing a lot more structures around human resources, operations.
That's correct.
Finance.
So there are less booths at the hotel level, and these functions are all centralized. But yes, of course, these are charged back to the hotel units.
I think institutional investors are looking at Africa, but I think I think most of the hotel development that we are seeing is more still individual based. And I think over the years it will change, but I think it's primarily driven. And I think people who have had success are now moving into multi-property, multi-brands, exploring beyond their boundaries, from maybe Kenya to neighboring countries and beyond. So we hope to get more institutional finance and people in this region, but I think currently it's driven. And I think with the third-party operator model, it's easier for them to scale up because they may have the financing, but they may not have the ability to then manage in multiple locations. And this is where the third-party operator works very well.
Yeah, I think, look, we've seen it with a lot of pension funds starting to enter the space. They're first-time hotel owners. They like to go sort of a traditional, clean, simple model, typically brand managed. But what we see with family offices, individual owners, even some funds, I think after a while of ownership, they start realizing that it is a little bit more of a rigid structure. They might want a little bit more control, flexibility. If they have multiple properties in a portfolio, just consolidating the reporting, the communication lines, etc. They start seeing those benefits and they start looking at other models and they start to discover, well, franchise is actually a really good viable option. So we've seen that transition. Where we've had a lot of interest recently is with I think after COVID, especially in terms of underwriting of hotel projects from the banks. We know funding has become a lot more stringent. So there's a lot more attention to containing development costs and making sure you kind of have a really efficient operation, which helps the bottom line. And the franchise model is a good fit for that from the very beginning. So where we get involved with a lot of our owners is right from the get-go, get involved with their design phase, work along their professional team, and just make sure that initial design phase costing of the project is as lean as possible, because that is the fundamental basis of your underwriting. And then designing the commercial, the business really of the hotel, because a hotel is a business. It's not a piece of real estate. So we design the business around that piece of real estate to make that model bankable, really. And we've got a great deal of flexibility with that. And with the support of the brand, the distribution systems that they bring, that obviously is a big value add and enhances the whole viability of that model.
I mean, you guys obviously deal with the brands quite a lot, and you have been over the last few years, or last 5-10 years. Would you say there's been, obviously not to speak for them, would you say there's been a little bit of a shift in some of their strategies over the last 5 years since COVID? I mean, we've kind of seen it in products, but not that they've necessarily, mentioned it, but in terms of, how they look at management and which hotels they're interested in and which ones they're not, etc. I mean, maybe just talk about that in terms of your interactions.
I'll start. So yeah, I think the brands have been very welcoming of bringing in independent third parties because, they are open to flexibility. But it needs to be motivated in the right way, and it needs to be workable from an operations perspective. So that's the lens at which we look at these projects. So they're very amenable to making adjustments, and they're very supportive to that. It's just motivating it in the right way. And often where owners try and take that task on themselves, they usually push that responsibility onto their professional team. And that's maybe not the right lens to look at these projects through. It's really through an operator role. So that's why it's important to kind of get us involved early and work alongside the brands to get those deviations, to make those changes. And it's all to the benefit of the fundamentals of every project.
Also, we happen to notice that brands prefer the franchise route as the cleaner way to grow. to have flags, and now there are independent operators or experienced independent operators like ourselves, like Valor Hospitality, that can be trusted by the brands with respect to ensuring that the brand standards are adhered to at all times at their hotels. So this is a much cleaner way for brands to increase their size, increase their portfolio, without taking on the day-to-day headache of operating the hotels and taking 250 decisions a day at these hotels.
Yeah, so it'd be good to hear from the only operator management company in the room, just to understand from your perspective, you know, what the benefits are. I mean, Wyndham, I think in the US, it's your dominant model in terms of franchising. So it obviously works for you. So what are the kind of things that makes it more attractive? I mean, we've heard earlier here that obviously it helps grow more flags because you've effectively got more development guys out there selling your brands, obviously selling multiple brands, but they're selling your brands as well. And it's less of a headache in terms of operating and dealing with parties. And honestly, if you look at the actual fees, it's not that, I mean, it's probably about 75% of what you would get on management. So yeah, just to hear from you.
Thanks, Wayne. No, so I don't think hotel management contracts or agreements are disappearing. Obviously, they have their place for certain strategic assets, maybe luxury brands, etc. At Wyndham, obviously, our DNA is franchise. 99% of our portfolio of 8,400 hotels are all franchise-based. So it's our DNA, it's our core business, it's how our systems are geared towards supporting individual owners. Out of that 8,000, we've got 6,000 individual owners. So it's a very franchise-friendly model. And to your point, obviously, we work very closely with all third-party operators on sort of joint proposals in terms of fees and collaboration. And for us, our center of focus and our center of thinking is always on the owner, whether it makes sense for the owner on a return basis to operate it on his own or with a third party. So it's always driven by the owner and the capabilities of the owner. Yes, the brands cannot franchise from afar without the local execution, understanding a very, very deep understanding of the markets, licensing, taxation, labor laws, procurement, everything that we have to rely on our operating partners and individual owners.
I think the brands have seen the benefits of coming into new markets with third-party operators where they have very little or no know-how of running operations. And I think that's how they've been very open to the idea in the last few years to have a third-party operator running their hotels on a franchise agreement, which is beneficial also for the owner because obviously, as mentioned, that it gives in more flexibility to the owner. The contracts for third-party operators are a bit more flexible as well in terms of management contracts. So I think there is an easy departure in case things don't work out as compared to a brand where you are tied up for a longer time. And of course, brands have seen this, that when they've tried to franchise to new markets, to new owners, they've had challenges, and which of course then becomes a bigger challenge for the brand in terms of the name in the market. And that definitely that then they're more comfortable now. They know that there is an operator who can follow the brand standards much better than what they would. The probability of success for the brand as well as for the owner increases with a third-party operator.
Okay, let's tackle the elephant in the room here. In terms of fees, so I mean, I'm sure you guys have been asked this question, so it'll be interesting to see what your responses are when an owner says to you, but I mean, you're going to make me pay more. If you add your management fees plus the incentive fees that you're charging, plus the royalty fee of the franchise, plus the marketing fee, if you compare that to if the brand would manage it, typically on face value, okay, I'm not talking about other hidden costs or any other things, but at face value, you will be more expensive. So what do you say to owners when they pose that question to you?
No, we get that question many a times from our existing owners, from our prospective owners as well. And the general perception is that there is double dipping on fees because there are two parties involved, a franchisor and a management company, and a fee needs to be, or a royalty fee needs to be paid to the franchisor and a management fee needs to be paid to the operator. But again, there are studies that clearly reflect that the management fee and the royalty fee that is paid in this model, in this tripartite arrangement, is more or less the same if a brand were to manage the hotel asset. But again, there could be a difference of 1 or 2 percentage points, but the value is not driven by the fees. The value is primarily driven by the impact that this model adds to the bottom line or to the GOP margins. Again, there was this recent study that I happened to come across, and it clearly states that an independent hotel operator model along with a franchisor adds close to 15 to 20% to the GOP margins. So that's where the value is to be seen, and not to the two sets of fees that are being paid.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is a common question, and you're right. On face value, there is a price differential. But again, what's often not priced into this is the overall benefit of the project. And really it comes, like Aman says, it does come down to bottom line. More than that, it comes back to return and the bankability of a project. And I think it's important to understand, again, going back to the very beginning of a project, to get the CapEx costs, the development costs right from the beginning. Third-party managers we are embedded into a professional team. So we're very driven to try and get that right, because ultimately we need to deliver on that investment. So that's the first part. So there's a massive benefit, I think, there. Like Aman said, in terms of structuring the business from the ground up to be more efficient, lean, well-oiled machine, obviously we do that. But over and above that, there's a lot of other benefits. So like we said earlier, it's that single point of contact when you're dealing with multiple properties. It's the ability to brand your portfolio under a multitude of different brands, have one operator in place. It's clustering abilities. It's potentially setting up operating platforms. It is, all the value adds that we bring in terms of, food and beverage concepts. For example, we have a dedicated food and beverage consulting sister company called Savor by Valor, where we, develop bespoke food and beverage concepts for hotels to try and elevate, to try and monetize your guests in a different way. So I think from that side, and more than that, so where we don't necessarily manage, right? So if an owner has a portfolio where they have franchise properties, brand managed properties, we can slot in from an asset management perspective as well. So we can oversee the entire portfolio for an owner. So I think that's benefits that's not necessarily captured in that 1 or 2 percentage point price differential.
Also, I think the brands are opening up to the idea of third-party management. So they're quite flexible and they are ready to talk on the fee when they know there is a third-party operator, because the probability of success for everybody, all the parties involved, are increased. So we can always sit down with our relationships with the brand to see what the best value we can get to the owner. And I think, like mentioned, that when you're in the project from the very beginning, it really helps in terms of designing the whole business. And of course, the flexibility and the cost reductions that you get with a third-party operator who understands the local market better, it's a win-win for all of them.
Yeah, I mean, you say that about the cost structures and stuff, but it's difficult to show the tangible results. I mean, do you have a lot of results that you show to owners? Because I always find this difficult as well. If you mention that, you need to be able to back it up with physical stats from other markets, etc. So like we took over this portfolio and increased from X to Y. Otherwise, it's very, it's difficult to sell it because, you're also competing in some cases. If the brand does want to manage that, you're competing with a company that's probably like 50 times the size of you and it has a reputation in the market, some of them 100 years. So yeah, maybe just explore that a bit.
No, I think where the cost benefits comes with is local expertise that we have in specific markets. I think that brings in a lot of thing. Also, since your resources are mostly available locally, rather than resourcing, setting up like a good example was how they created a common structure for Onomo, wherein they could get benefits. And if you could then compare it to any international structure, it would have then costed it more to the owner. And like I said, it's the win is in when the owner, the operator, and the brand sits together and works out on the fees. Because on a franchise model, there are less hidden costs in the contract as compared to when it gets into the management model, that some of them may not be well defined, that may come out later. But in agreement with the third-party operator and with the franchise agreement, the agreements are a bit more straightforward.
But Wayne, even prior to the opening of the hotel, during the development stage, there's a lot of value addition to be seen. I mean, case in point, at ALEPH Hospitality, what we do is, and this is in our vested interest, we do a brand search exercise on behalf of our owners, and basically we send out the details of the hotels or the development to all the brands, get their proposals, do a comparative analysis, then submit our recommendations to the owners, because at the end of the day, if the right brand is chosen for the asset, that would always have a positive impact. And the fees that we charge is directly pegged to the performance of the hotel. Also, during the pre-opening stage, our pre-opening cycles are relatively shorter. That's lower pre-opening budget, short, and well, just to give you an example, I was talking about this massive complex in Dubai. We did a comparison of what a brand would charge in terms of pre-opening budget vis-a-vis us, and we kind of came up with a number of $2 million in savings. So it's not only during the operational phase, but also prior to the opening of the hotel and during the development stage, there's a lot of value addition to be seen.
Yeah, I think from our side, if you go to our website, there's a number of case studies that you can actually reference. I think we're in quite a unique position because we've been in the industry for so long, and we have a global presence. We have multiple different mandates. We have a franchise, we have asset management mandates, and we've done this exercise among some of the properties that we asset manage, because we have insight into that performance, the recharges, all the embedded costs that come with brand managed. And we've done the exercise, and it's quite a significant differential in some instances. If it's not controlled, right? I mean, I think that's the key thing here, is where there's no control from an ownership perspective, often there will be a lot of costs incurred by the brands. But I mean, I've seen anywhere in the region of 10, 12, 13% as a percentage of total revenue, right? Cost to an owner of that fee structure. We typically try and contain an all-in cost, franchise fees, management fees. Usually, depending on the property, you're looking at anywhere between 7 to 9% of total revenue, typically. So it's not that big of a differential. Even if you just compare straight fees, I mean, a brand, you're looking at 6, 7% of total revenue in terms of fees. So it's not a major differential.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on the brands and on what their strategy is in terms of their franchising. But yeah, I mean, I think if you look at from an Africa perspective, if you put those fees together, I mean, the franchising, I mean, we're looking at franchise fees with the others, it does add up.
But Wayne, we are missing the key element over here. We, as the independent operator, we work in the best interest of the hotel and the owner. We don't have a brand to protect. Yes, we want to ensure that the brand standards are adhered to. We have a great relationship with our brands because they trust us with the brands. So, but again, the key focus is the hotel and the ownership. So I see that there is no conflict of interest when it comes to this sort of an arrangement, a tripartite arrangement, wherein the operator or the independent management company is primarily driven by performance. I
think something else to add is also what are you getting right, for what you're paying for that cost. And with third-party management, there's an additional strategic layer that sits on top of your on-property team. And that, constant interaction, support that we provide, in multiple different departments, from food and beverage, sales and marketing, technical services, etc., on a consistent basis, adds a lot of benefit to the property. It makes sure we keep a handle on costs, make sure everything runs efficiently. That level of embedded activity in an owner's property, it's way above what they would typically get. So I think that added benefit, you can really see and feel it in the performance of your property.
Yes, I think the profitability of the business gets better in the third-party management model, because like you rightly said, that each thing is, you manage the property as an individual, and rather than more on a group level, and you understand the basics of each different markets. So I think that adds up, since we all work on percentages and not on any fixed fees, I think it's a win-win for everyone, where a better profitability means better returns for everyone. And cost structures, like we discussed, that now even the brands are so flexible in terms of agreeing to a certain one if they know that there is a third-party operator that will help them to achieve the brand standards and the performance in that market.
And I would just like to add to what Vivek just said. We also, as an independent operating company, we also add value to driving the top line of the hotel. I mean, if a hotel is brand managed, there's always that hesitance from the general manager or the commercial teams to reach out to the corporate teams and tell them, okay, your system is not generating a lot of direct bookings for our hotel. But our general managers have no shame in doing that. They would just pick up the phone, or even our commercial teams, they would just pick up the phone and tell them, Mr. Brand, you need to increase your contribution for our particular hotel. So, yeah.
I think we've been leaving you out here, Charl. I don't know if you've got anything to add.
No problem. Happy to. No, I mean, just to add to everyone, what everyone said, cheaper on paper isn't necessarily the most profitable option there. The good thing about franchise is we're completely, it's a transparent transaction. So, we abide by US disclosure laws, and that sort of differs by region, but we're completely transparent in terms of our fees with our owners, with our operators. So from the get-go, we're essentially giving it all in terms of what our systems are charging, everything. So it's a very open, very, very forward-thinking model, and I think it's
Yeah, you touched on earlier in terms of there's horses for courses in terms of the kind of projects that you guys would look at getting involved in. So there's obviously you have your view in terms of which projects you'd be interested in managing and where you believe you can add value. Maybe just touch on that a bit. I mean, is it by markets? I mean, you kind of stay away from secondary markets. You focus more on major hubs. Do you look at what other brands you have there? Is it by level or in terms of quality, etc.?
It's a good question, Wayne, because I mean, obviously, historically, as I mentioned, Wyndham's DNA is 99% franchise. But in certain markets in the Middle East, we have 10 assets that we manage, and those assets are managed out of necessity because it was driven by ownership need and capability. At this stage, I'm talking 15, 20 years ago, you're not necessarily dealing with owners sophisticated enough to understand the model, the tripartite agreement. So you're almost put in a position where you're saying, yes, we can manage, we have the systems, we have the capabilities, and we'll. It's a trust exercise. We tell them exactly, where we are in our process, our teams, our resources, and this is what we can do for you. So yes, we do have some assets that we manage out of necessity, and those are obviously sort of helped us grow in that region prevalently. But to your question, no, we're obviously focusing on key strategic markets. We're not necessarily going in with certain brands. Our entry into Africa has historically been with our Armada brand, and that's because it's been quite well known in certain key source markets like China and US and certain parts of Europe, and it's just been a sort of a Euro brand for us. But we haven't said yes, we have to come into the city with a primary core brand, then move out to tertiary and secondary cities. Wyndham started 40 years ago with a Howard Johnson, which is an economy brand, a 40 key along the highway. So we're very well versed in the mid-scale and economy segment. So we understand that part of growing as well in tier 2 and tier 3 cities.
I mean, one of the other models we haven't touched on, which is in terms of like white label. So I don't know if everybody understands what white label hotel is. Basically, if you have its own brand name and it gets managed either by the owner or by a third-party management company. So, I mean, there's some famous hotels, the Ritz, the Savoy, etc., that have been, you could classify as that. So, I mean, are there still places for this in the market? Do you see it, and where do you see it? Where do you see a white label kind of brand in terms of working from that perspective?
On the white label, I think all these models work together. But when it comes to SARV, what we usually encourage our investors is to look for a brand, because what you get is great value in terms of your loyalty programs, your distribution. But at the end of the day, there are certain unique products which, probably because of the age of the product or maybe the boutique nature of the project, that it fits more into the white label and for sure, the third-party operator becomes even more important in that whole operations, because you have to now be the brand, which means you are making the brand standards. You're now implementing the brand standards. You're now making sure that the financial viability of the business is there. So you basically design the business from top to bottom. But of course, it's always better in terms of, and with the changing competition coming all over the world, I think white labels, slowly, what you call them, get converted to independent brands, which are more in lines of an autograph or a luxury collection, where you can keep your name, you can have your own identity, but you can have a soft brand where it also gives you that advantage of being on a booking engine. But there are some great white labels that you just mentioned that are legendary, and I think, but in most cases you've seen that they are either not well managed or well made, and it always becomes a bit of a challenge. But there are certain products all over the world that really don't need really a brand to sell them, and they sell themselves. But that's a very small percentage.
Yeah, I think from our side, white label properties, we love them. It's a bit of a niche for us. And it's, I think, also driven by how the business was started with the, with the partners in our business, opening the likes of like Cape Grace as an example, being involved in, Wantenaar, Singita, et cetera, over years. And I think that sort of entrepreneurial mindset, the luxury aspect of it, that is ingrained in what we bring to the table to these properties. But I think it's very beneficial to have an entity like us involved with a property like that, because it brings consistency to the business structure. I mean, if an owner tends to manage this himself, he's very reliant on a general manager. It's one person. If that person leaves, there's a, institutional knowledge that goes with that person. It can be quite disruptive to the image, to the performance of such a property. So having, consistency from an operating model perspective, I think is very important. Differentiating the guest experience, again, trying to centralize some of the functions like finance, accounting, sales and marketing, etc. We can take out some of those costs that would traditionally sit in that business and have it run through, for example, our head office. Again, this is a benefit to the bottom line of that business, because it's much cheaper to share that cost among multiple properties than have a dedicated team member or multiple team members embedded in that business. So we've seen it work exceptionally well for white label properties, and it's not like there aren't distribution systems that could also benefit such a property. So some brands have offered, affiliation programs as an example. There's SLH, which is a big distribution system, also linked to Hilton. So there's a loyalty program aspect with that as well. So there's so many solutions you can implement, but it comes down to a cost-benefit analysis. But yeah.
Okay, I've been told, last point.
I'm sorry. You can conclude it. No, according to us, the white label operations or white label branding works in markets where there's a robust demand, there's lack of quality branded supply. So the market kind of acts in a very monopolistic way. That's one of the factors that we see. Second could be that the owner's interest is to develop a brand and export the brand, or it could be for niche products. I mean, we manage. 20% of our portfolio is branded on a white label basis. So, but again, there's a certain risk to it as well, because if a particular asset is not branded and there's new branded supply that enters the market, so there's definitely pressure on the demand and the rates. Yeah. So.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody, and I think it's been some great discussions and some interesting topics. So, thanks very much.
Thank you.